Our next guest is sounding an alarm on big tech's power and its impact on the economy. Joining us now, Columbia University professor Tim Wu. He is known as the architect of the Biden administration's competition and antitrust policies. His new book is out tomorrow, The Age of Extraction, How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threaten Our Future Prosperity. It's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you, too.
I guess just frame out big picture, why now you sound this alarm on big tech? Is it just a continuation of their dominance, or what's changing in terms of their position in the economy?
I think about 7 years ago they started becoming this dominant position. But I think usually in an economy, you start to have some serious challenges. I think they've really locked in, entrenched their power, in particular in the AI age. There's a sort of urgency. Is it just going to be them? Are they going to have such a take on the rest of the economy that nobody else can really make money?
That's an interesting piece of this, because on one level, only those companies could invest on the scale they're investing in right now. Yeah. But the desperation and urgency that's implied and how fast they're going on that, I wonder if that suggests they believe that their core businesses are vulnerable if they don't do this. So therefore, maybe, competition is working.
I mean, I think that's the question. I think the big question right now is whether AI is actually a threat to the tech platforms, or whether they manage to use artificial intelligence. They're some of the big investors to insulate themselves in perpetuity. I mean, OpenAI is not one of them. OpenAI is a challenger. So that sort of behind the scenes, people aren't paying attention to the fact that we may have the establishment of a dominant sort of global monopoly that lasts a really long time and I think extracts a big price, or we could have a real challenge from AI and a new prosperity based on that.
It's interesting, OpenAI, you mentioned that they're the challenger, but they're also creating this web of relationships with all of the kind of incumbent players, right? As one way or another, cloud services relationships, they're investing on the processor side with NVIDIA and all the rest. What does that mean in terms of how this evolves from here? And what are the costs that you're really looking at that average people might pay ultimately?
I mean, the costs are the typical costs of monopoly. I think every company looks good at the beginning, but these, Amazon, Google, so forth, they've been there a while. They're starting to extract more and more. They extract more from everybody else. Look at advertising prices. Look at what Amazon sellers sell. I think it's getting more and more. I think the key question, and I keep saying it, if you have these big giants, you want them fighting. If I was still in government, I'd want to sort of provoke it. I think government needs to scrutinize more carefully the efforts by the big tech companies to control AI, so there's a fight and we see a renewal of innovation and progress.
Okay, so what, I guess, in a tangible way, could government do to kind of instigate these fights?
Well, they could take a closer look, for example, at some of the deals. There's these reverse acquisitions that they've been making of Microsoft made one recently of an AI company. The OpenAI, Microsoft was careful not to completely buy OpenAI, but if anyone gains control, Anthropic, Amazon is trying to get control of them. I think the government should be watching and try to prevent the AI challengers from being controlled by big tech and insulating their monopolies.
Is there, I know there's a debate out there about whether some of these businesses are to some degree natural monopolies, whether, because of the network effects, because, the benefits of scale, and just, Google has dominance in search, maybe for decent reasons ultimately. Now you see as a company like Alphabet feeling vulnerable on its search franchise. So I guess I keep wondering whether, in fact, even if all this money is being spent well, it might create these sort of parallel players as opposed to one big one.
It's a good question. I mean, I'm always afraid that natural monopoly is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
You just say, so nothing can happen. I believe in challenge. I believe that that's the path to greater prosperity and more innovation is companies challenging each other. So I wouldn't count everything out. I mean, I think it is an uncertain time, but I think we should have our thumb on wanting it to be more uncertain. I'm very concerned the main reason for these giant investments in AI is to try to insulate the monopoly, as opposed to actually make products better. And I think we're these are middle-aged monopolies. They're due for a real challenge.
And there's been a lot of attention on what has been referred to as sort of the circularity of some of these investments. I don't know if this is something you would directly have addressed, but NVIDIA, with all of its excess cash, it's pulling from all of these cloud players and such. They're kind of reinvesting it and seeding some of their customers, more or less, and having those come back in revenue. Now, they say there's no stipulation on how it's spent, but how does that work into all of this?
You know, I think it's under-examined. I think we're in an era where, the particularly antitrust enforcers, have an older toolbook. They're not looking at how these web of contracts may inhibit competition in new ways, and I think it's something we need to be better with.
Andrew?
Hey, Tim, can you just speak to the pure scale of capital that's required to really fund a huge large language model, especially those that are on the frontier? And the reason I ask is because ultimately, and I think we're seeing it, some of these folks ultimately are turning to these circular deals because there isn't even enough cash as it is. So then I think to myself, how is it that we would fund all of this if, in fact, we didn't let some of these bigger companies engage themselves and get involved?
I mean, I'm not saying bigger companies can't get involved. I'll say two things. First, I'm not saying they can't get involved. I just want to make sure that the bigger monopolies do not completely buy off the threat to them from AI. I mean, for example, if Google could have somehow bought OpenAI 5 years ago, they would have. Maybe OpenAI wouldn't have sold, but there's a real danger of that happening. But also moving away from non-frontier. I mean, AI it's not quite commodified yet, but there are lower cost versions of AI that also make important challenger products. And I think we're going to see more of that in the times to come. Whether it's the Chinese competitors, whether it's just people using non-frontier but still good AI to try to challenge some of the major players.
We were just talking, obviously, about...
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Oh,
sure.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I just have one more, which relates to you mentioned China.
Yeah.
One of the things that all of these tech companies say is we're in this, race with China, and that is so critical. And I just want to understand from your perspective whether we should be even taking that piece of it into consideration or not from a sort of national security resiliency perspective. Now that a lot of this investment, and by the way, even the tariffs have been sort of, put in the flag of national security and resilience, where that sort of plays in your thinking.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in government, we spent a lot of time trying to slow down China. I think we had some success in that with some of the semiconductor measures and so forth. But I think this is really important. I think the most important industrial policy for the United States at home is competition. In other words, what we want is we want a big fight at home so our companies are stronger when they face the Chinese companies. And I think if we just say, well, everything's going to be invented by 2 or 3 big guys, it's like putting a huge bet on IBM in the 70s or AT&T in the 70s. Actually, it was other companies who ended up being the most important. And we sacrifice if we end up worshiping monopoly, we sacrifice our own competitiveness.